order is Order 1957, order certifying and countersigning RSU number 26, June 11th, 2019 warrant and notice of election. Could I have a motion, please?
Moved. Second.
All right. And Sophie will give us background.
Pursuant to Title 20A, Section 1502, RSU 26 has provided the Town Council with warrants and notices of election for its upcoming annual budget meeting on May 14th at the Orono High School cafeteria at 6 o'clock in the evening. A budget validation referendum on June 11th, Town Council chambers 7 a.m. to 8 p.m., so a traditional secret ballot. And a referendum election on a bond issuance on June 11th, Town Council chambers from 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. Under state law, municipal officers are charged with calling all municipal elections and town officials with maintaining the voter lists and running the elections. The warrants and notices have been provided for councilors to review prior to its formal action on Order 1957. However, the town does not have a role in determining the content of the document. RSU 26 is legally responsible for its warrants and defending any claims brought related to the validity of the ballot or election results. The RSU has provided many copies of these documents to be signed, all with original signatures. Sorry, folks. Each counselor should select a signature line and use that line on each of the documents. Please do not play the I'll sign in the top corner and then the bottom. Try to keep them the same. All 18 copies of the documents in the folder need to be signed, and to make this as painless as possible, Nancy has flagged your signature blocks to so you can go right to where you need to be.
Thank you very much. Does anyone have any questions on the process? Really do anything about information or anything? So if not, I will take a vote on Order 1957. All those in favor? Passes 5-0. All right.
My assumption is you'll work through the red folder and I'll collect it and Nancy will go home.
That
Yes.
would work perfectly. However, we need to take a motion to adjourn first.
Oh, sorry.
So moved.
All right. All those in favor? Passes unanimously. So now Nancy can leave. I apologize. I've been fighting a cold or allergies or something. So now we will open the council budget workshop, and in observance of Ramadan, we will be closing the meeting at 7:45 no matter where we are. So roll call is still the same, and Sophie will start with an overview.
First and foremost, the clock is behind me, which could be dangerous. So please, I would appreciate your help keeping me on target.
Do you want a 5-minute or 15-minute or?
You mean how much time I have total?
Yeah, left.
Oh, half hour.
Half hour. Okay.
For folks who, thank you, who might not already know, Mike Noble is the town assessor, and he's here with me today. Mike's. We've talked many times, with the exception of Terry, who's new, but we've talked about the components of a municipal budget. But let me just run through very quickly that when people think about the municipal budget, they're often thinking of their municipal or their local property tax. Our municipal budget is a component of the tax. So the town council has control of the budget that determines the projected revenues and the appropriated expenses for the town services. The town receives assessment or a bill from the school that must be paid by statute, and the town receives an assessment from the county that must be paid by statute. So when we add those three elements up, we get the total amount that needs to be raised from taxes, and the next component of that council has no control over is the valuation of the community, which is part of the reason that Mike is here with me today. As the town assessor, that is his job, is to determine the value and ensure that we have an equitable taxation scheme, correct?
That is correct, yes.
Very good. So when we look at the overview of the budget this year, municipal expenses are up a total of $5,744, or 0.05%. Most of that is the lack of increase is driven by a significant drop in the capital budget. We have an increase of approximately $340,000 in our operating expenses. And I just want to take a minute to talk a little bit about what is driving that increase. On the operating side, we really have two major factors. The first is we have a shrinking labor market. We're at less than 3% unemployment, which for many of us, that's almost like no unemployment, which is wonderful for workers. However, for us, we found that we had to increase the lower wages in the town in order to be able to recruit and retain skilled individuals. So you'll see some of that. We also are in the midst of negotiating labor contracts. The one with the police union has been approved, so the wage increases for that department are reflected in the budget. That when we went through that process, as I reported to council on a few occasions, what we found is that we had dropped well below the average market in our police wages and benefits, and we needed to correct that to bring us back to average. I would not say there is anything extravagant in the budget. However, we've presented a budget that aims to provide the same level of service that we currently are providing. So labor costs are definitely impactful in this budget. The second issue is, while we are not replacing lots of equipment this year, we have aging equipment. And so you will see, especially in the fire department, a pretty significant maintenance increase in the maintenance budget because we have older equipment that we're seeing more failures. And with public safety equipment, I can't just park the vehicle and say we'll come back to it when we have money. So you'll see some increases there. The capital budget, we have a proposed phased plan for North Main Avenue to be able to get the first section of North Main Avenue done this year, but that's another significant capital project. And we will need additional funds for the culvert project. One of the things that we're seeing as bids have started to be opened for capital projects throughout the region is that the prices are coming in very high, higher than budget estimates for other communities and other regional groups. So we've asked Rob to go back through and really examine our capital budget assumptions again based on what we're seeing in the last couple of weeks. It is likely that labor costs are driving some of that increase, but also materials are up. So the cost of providing the service is going up. So the good news is that we have more revenue sharing projected. I have projected 2.5% of revenue sharing, which, we talk often, we're supposed to be funded to the 5% level, which would be almost double what we're currently projecting to receive. However, the governor's budget has 2.5% in it. I have put that dollar amount in here. We are losing money in anticipated general fund revenues. I have projected ambulance billings and excise tax flat this year, and we had been seeing a trend upward in both of them. I'm a little bit concerned about excise tax. I don't know if it's timing for spring. Spring has been late to spring. So, but we're seeing our excise tax kind of tail off. We did not have the late February, early March that we would have expected to have. So I have at this point budgeted it flat, but we might end up coming back if we don't see that money come in, see an uptick in this month and next. We might have to come back and project that at a lower rate. We're not projecting any significant change in Homestead or Betty in the last couple of years. There have been statutory changes which have driven those revenues up higher, offset by corresponding losses on valuation. We also are projecting
Could you define what BETE is, or Betty?
business equipment tax exemption.
Thank you.
The capital revenues, so the capital budget is down $320,000. However, the anticipated capital revenues are down, non-tax revenues are down $430,000. So we are seeing a greater reliance on property tax to complete the capital program. So when everything is said and done, we are down in municipal revenues by about $96,000. Every year I bring council's attention to our undesignated and our fund balance, because for some people it looks like we have an incredibly healthy fund balance. It has been in the neighborhood of $8 million in the past. We have been eating away at our fund balance in order to be able to continue to provide the same level of services at a reasonable tax rate or mitigating tax increases. We are getting to the point in this budget, I put in what we used last year, but this budget is calling for an additional draw off the fund balance of almost $900,000. So $400,000 of undesignated funds and $488,000 of designated funds. That's going to be, I'm flagging for you, this is a discussion that council is going to want to have. So we know from the school that our school bill is going to stay flat this year. And we know that the county bill is up $15,000. So at the end of the day, the total increase of net assessment for commitment, so the total increase in the number of dollars that we need to raise through taxation is $116,805, and that's just a little under 1%. So that is my general overview of our expenses and our revenues.
Could you explain, is the 116,805, is that our expenses that's making the 1%, or is that the county making it the 1%?
That is all of it. So our expenses, our net increase just on the municipal side that you have control over, of expenses
0.5.
minus revenues
I know.
are, 101,805 or 2.13%. The next block are the assessments, and then you get to the total. Okay? I just want to take a minute to back up to remind folks of the process. And the process is that staff and I are obligated to create a budget. And that budget is based on the services that we think council wants us to provide. Our job is to tell you what it costs to provide the service. Your job is to tell us if you want us to do it differently, if you disagree with our assumptions on what it costs, and ultimately, what is right now my budget becomes your budget. So you are the ones that will have to adopt or not, with or without revision. When we sit here today, or any other budget workshop, our job is not to defend the budget like we own it. This is supposed to be a document that begins discussion and ensures that what staff believes is the work plan is in fact what council wants the work plan to be. And two, that council fully understands what it will take to provide whatever work plan it decides. So often I have gone through, so this is my 20th budget. I have gone through this process so many times, gotten to the end thinking, wow, I did all this work and they didn't have lots of questions, I was spot on, only to have somebody say, well, I didn't understand this, or I don't think we should do that. This is the time for that discussion. And so often we get stuck on the individual budget lines because they're in front of us. I really would encourage council to not get stuck there. Absolutely, if there are questions, let's talk about what the questions are, but definitely have some conversation about the goals, the objectives, the work plan, so that we can make sure that everybody is got the same expectation moving forward into the next year as to what we're going to be doing. Does that make sense? So, yep. Sure.
Tom's name is on.
That is because
I didn't know.
that is because I don't believe Terry was on the board when that resolution.
So Tom has to sign.
Yep.
Okay.
That's an old document that Nancy figured out we didn't have you sign. So we've talked about expenses and revenues at the very highest level. The next piece of that, to put it into context, I invited Mike to come and talk with you a little bit about the health of the value of the town of Orono.
The health of the value, that's an interesting way to describe it. Healthy or unhealthy. Value is value. So I've been here for 4 months or so now. Obviously, I don't have the historical information on the value and the current market here in the community, but I have been looking at the sales on a regular basis, and I've visited a number of properties, monitoring listings, all the things associated with establishing and predicting value. I'm not a fortune teller, so I can't give you a number as to where we're going to be and determine a mill rate at this point. That's all done at the time of commitment in August. But as a general rule of thumb, all the indicators are that the value is pretty much going to be stagnant for this year. There is a small amount of appreciation I would expect from the pickup work that will be done, the new builds, lot splits, so on and so forth. There is a pending issue with one taxpayer that we're working through to hopefully minimize the impact to future valuation. That's really all I have to offer with regard to value. I'm sorry, it's not specific and it's not a magic number, but again, that all comes in August at commitment time. Again, my prediction is things should be relatively stagnant. There'll be some changes here or there, but the bottom line should be pretty close to the same as it was last year. Any questions on that? Any questions in general? Some of you, it's the first time I've seen you and met you. So, I mean, if you have general questions for me, I'd be glad to answer or, Laura.
How does that compare to other?
You mean the market or value or what?
Well, you said that you're looking, we're making a guess about how much we need to increase our mill rates, pay this budget, pay our bills.
Yes.
Then it's great that you would come and say, how can you're not a fortune teller, it doesn't look like the bottom's gonna fall out, or
Right.
you're losing that. And also, we're gaining the value. Would you say that that's representative of Maine, where there are places that are going to be increasing in value? That they're trying, because if you do this to our town, I assume you can have this also compare that. But maybe not, because our goal is to make sure that we can pay our bills with what we think.
Yeah, honestly, Lori, I don't look at any other communities. I mean, what's happening in another community has no bearing on this community, aside from really far-fetched implications through revenue sharing. I mean, if another town is gaining or losing value, that will affect our revenue sharing and reimbursement. But every community's market is different. For instance, Millinocket, where I came from, over a period of 10 years, lost a couple $100 million in value when the mill closed. Obviously, you don't have mill closings here. So what's happening in one community, no bearing on a neighboring community.
Mike, could you maybe explain a little bit about what goes into the value of the town? Are you looking at stagnant residential, but maybe up and coming commercial, or I don't know. I'm not sure if I'm using the right words, but
Cindy, I would say that it's a seller's market as far as single-family residential goes. Given that pricing is probably up a little bit, indications are that the certified ratio is going to be somewhere in the mid-90s. So what that means is the town of Orono would certify a ratio of the value I put on a property versus the value it's going to sell for. We certify at 100%. So that means, in essence, the value I put on a property should be plus or minus 10% of what it sells for. So currently, indicators are that our ratio is going to be closer to the mid-90s, which means there's some room to adjust some of the properties, single-family residential, upwards to reflect current market conditions. And I say that like it's a simple little task. It really isn't. You can't just do an across-the-board 5% increase, because some neighborhoods may not be seeing that, and some neighborhoods may be seeing a 10% increase. There's the hot neighborhoods, and then there's the ones that are not so hot. So I don't know if that really answers your question. Commercial, there really isn't a lot of industrial. The power generation, I mean, those are all relatively stagnant. We may see a little bit of an increase on our residential side.
So, having come from a community that actually doesn't, we were selling homes for $40,000, $20,000. I mean, obviously, I understand what you're talking about. And when we had a mill of some sort leave, it really hits pretty dramatically. So, understanding the valuations, what is it? So, what portion of how of the price of the average home, what is there like a percentage of that actually factors into what your actual assessment is? Because I've heard before where sometimes it's like, oh yes, you may sell a house here for $150,000, but on your taxes it's typically slightly lower. Is there like a thing to follow with that, or a guideline for? Is it strictly here? If you sell your house for $150,000, the valuation's $150,000?
I think what you're trying to get toward is something that I just talked about, the assessment ratio. Basically, sale of a house by itself does not set the market. So if you sold your house for 200 and I had it for 175, I instantly go and bump it to 200. That methodology is frowned upon by Maine Revenue Services, who oversees what I do. But it does indicate market or establish market. So if you had a home within a development that sold for 200, and then you had 10 other homes within that development that were exactly the same, well, that's going to be a strong influence on the value of those properties. I don't know, Terry, if that answers exactly, or if I'm going in the right direction or not. But yeah, so it's more of at this point, the value I put on it should sell for pretty close. And if I see that sales are trending one way or the other away from the assessed value, then it's time to make adjustments and bring those back into check.
So this is one of the reasons why having a computerized, fully robust data collection system that holds all the information about individual houses is very important. And as council is aware, that's a project that we have underway in-house. We started that several years ago. The town's job is to ensure that there's equity in the assessment of taxes. That's why we value property, because the value of property to the whole is what determines what people have to pay for their fair share. So when we started the data collection process, which is just a fancy way of saying revaluation, we had hoped that we would be able to pick up some per diem support staff and do this in-house. Our assessor at the time had significant experience with reval work, had done that with his own shingle before coming to Orono. For a variety of reasons, we started the work. We've had a really hard time slogging through it. So the good news is we haven't spent a lot of money on it. However, we also haven't made as much progress as we had hoped this far in. So when Mike arrived 4 months ago, one of the first things I asked him to do was to look at where we were with the reval project and come back to me with his technical guidance on what we needed to do, because we know we need to get to a point where we are calculating value in the same place that we are calculating assessments. We want it to be set up so that if he wants to see ranch homes, he can see ranch homes, and he has people's square footage in a format that can be factored in a transparent way. I think that's one of the keys with assessing is people might not agree, but if we're transparent and people can come in and see exactly what we're doing, it makes our residents a lot more comfortable with what happens. So, giving him absolutely no time to get his feet under him, I asked him to evaluate where we were and come up with some suggestions for moving forward. I would love for him to talk to you about that a little bit.
And I have a question too, for Mike. And my question is calculating land value, and I'm not sure how to say it. I feel kind of like Cindy. I'm not sure how to say it or what the language is, but I mean, there's tracts of land that don't have structures on them. So how do you how does one go about saying, what's the criteria for saying this piece of land is, this acre is worth this much, or do you do that, or how do you know what I'm saying? Because I don't.
I do.
Okay.
So the land values are derived from land value schedules, which are aspects of the sale. Same as the house, part of the sale is attributed to the land as it is the house. Different land tracts within different neighborhoods would carry different values. Same as, for instance, waterfront would carry a different value. And then each lot is assessed a base lot
Mhm.
for that neighborhood. Typically $45,000 to $60,000 is your base lot. And then from there, the assessments or the value falls. So you have excess acreage up to some assessments have a secondary lot. So if you had a 2-acre lot, you'd pay like a half rate second acre. And then it falls into excess acreage, which is everything above the house lot and less than 10 acres. Again, you get a reduction in rate, $1,000 to $2,000 an acre for those. And then over 10, it drops again. So a lot of people don't understand that their neighbor has 12 acres and they've only got an acre, and yet their land value is only a few thousand more. Why is that? Well, the reason is because the assessment drops, substantially as you increase your acreage.
Okay.
Per acre assessment.
So if we have land, or if there's a house that along the river, right,
Mhm.
waterfront property, is land here in Orono, are those houses assessed higher because they're on the river? Because they're on the Penobscot, Stillwater, whatever it is? I mean, do we have Riverview waterfront property that is assessed at a higher rate?
I can say with quite certainty that a view is not influencing.
Well, waterfront, yeah, I don't know about that.
Actually, owning waterfront may. Honestly, Cheryl, I haven't had an opportunity to research it that in depth yet.
Okay.
I haven't gotten to that point. It's typical within a community to show an increased value on waterfront property. Certainly on the lake, it's very evident that the value is there. The river, I'm not so sure. I'd have to check. Okay. So back to what Sophie was passed off to me. I had some concerns with the time frame with regard to our revaluation project. We're a couple years in, maybe a little more, and we're about 50% done with single-family residential only. So after discussing with Sophie, I put out an RFP, requested proposals for revaluation by an outside company. I mean, I know that I couldn't do it myself, and I mean, the other issue that you run into when you're doing an in-house reval is the market's constantly changing. So if you're 2 or 3 years into this, sometimes the data that you got in year one is no longer good because it's changing and it's evolving. So I put out an RFP. I only had two responses, and they were separated significantly in the cost. Currently working with the two of them and hoping to have somebody sign on here within the next month or so to do the job, finish the job. So they're going to do the commercial, industrial, multifamily, and then I'm going to push to finish the residential, but there is a plan in place that they will assist with that if necessary. So ideally for April 1 of 2020, and if not 2020, then 2021, we would have new values for commitment. Anticipate typically the cost of a reval is usually recovered through value that you've found as part of that reval, whether it be simply through the market conditions or additional work that was not picked up at its time, or sometimes interior renovations, things that people do that add value, kitchen remodels, bathroom remodels. Sometimes people don't get permits for those. So we find a lot of that stuff when you're out measuring and listing properties. So hopefully that would be the case, that the actual cost will be offset.
Cost.
Yeah.
Offset that one.
By the value that it would generate, yes. And that may be optimistic, but my fortune teller globe would indicate that we should be able to offset it with the value we'd find.
So what's not in the budget, because we don't have numbers yet, is to move forward even with the lower of the two proposals, which we're vetting. I'm very impressed with Mike's level of review, research, reference, going out to find references. That is $135,000. We have $43,000 remaining in our original allotment, and we had indicated that a place that we could go to get more money might be a reclassification of the Public Works Garage Reserve balance that will be left at the end of the year. So I just leave that as we're going to have a discussion about where that goes. We're just not quite, unfortunately, our timetable isn't lining up with the budget year. But we wanted to make sure that we didn't go all the way through this process and not make you aware that that is something that we're working on. And, there would be, I think, significant value to council to work at getting it all done and implemented as soon as we can. So that.
Hi, sorry, I'm Sam.
I see him.
Bringing the outside agency and the outside company in to do this, that would be just to complete what has already been started, correct? Or is this, let's do it from scratch so everyone's on the same page?
The plan is that what's been done in-house is only single-family residential. Measured, listed, photos. What hasn't been done is any multifamily, commercial, industrial.
Okay.
So my plan as of right now is to continue to work on the single-family residential in-house. And the outside firm will take care of the rest. And then part of this bid is they're going to review the single-family work to make sure it's
Okay,
consistent. Because we have had a multitude of different listers. Listers are the people that go out and measure and grade the houses. So we've had a number of different listers with different qualifications and different views. So they're going to do a review of
Okay,
that work
thank you. That
as
was
part of this.
That was the piece I was missing. Thank you very much.
Yep.
So for Mike to finish that work, the single family though, is there going to be an additional cost to the one up over and above the 135 for that work to get done?
So for the 135, we'll take care of all of the single family residential, and then we can roll that in, right?
Say that again, Cindy, I'm sorry.
So Sophie's given us a number of 135,000
Yes.
to finish the reval. And what I'm trying to figure out is if that is the commercial, industrial, and multifamily, and we're still have a cost for finishing up the single-family homes, or are you able to do that with the budget you have, I guess?
The price, there is additional cost to single family that would have to be done by the outside agency, $45 per parcel, if it's not done in-house.
Great, but if you're doing it in-house, is that adding to the budget separate from the 135?
We've budgeted $10,000 this year to hire help.
If that would finish it.
I hope so. I told Sophie I'm going to be down here Saturdays and Sundays with my wife measuring and listing properties to get this done, but I'm in hopes that will do it.
I did offer up Isaiah.
So we would be looking at 145,000 for the reval project.
Yes, 10 of that is already calculated in the budget.
And we have 43 to offset it.
Yep.
Already.
That's you're saying.
That is what we had talked about before. But council changes and council's mind can change too. So I just wanted to flag that so that as we get further down in the next few weeks, Mike is going to have a recommendation. And I wanted you to be able to get your reval questions out. We can talk about money when we have more information, but I figured if he was here to talk value, we should talk all value.
May I just ask one brief question, because I know we're pressed for time, so not to go down a rabbit hole with this question, but the property that, I don't know how to phrase this, is under review in terms of its assessment, or is in assessment limbo, shall we say, at the moment? If there were to be a change in that valuation, when would that hit the town's budget? When would that impact us?
It would actually impact us this year. Mike is going to make a decision in the next few weeks.
Mhm.
He's working with the property owner. If the decision is to grant an abatement, it's one of the reasons why we have overlay, so that we can pay for tax abatements out of that account. But it would hit this year. I think the maximum would be, we calculated 127, if it got everything that
Mhm.
was requested,
Mhm.
127,000. But one of the things I like about the way Mike approaches the work is I think he's working with the taxpayer now to ensure that when everything is said and done, we address the concerns with the current year, but also have some agreement on next year, so we hopefully won't be in this position. Losing value is tough. Losing value after you've committed the tax is painful. So I think our goal is to try to get the right value, and it's, I think we'll end up with something somewhere, hopefully not too painful. So, helpful? Do you want to say something?
I don't. Well, we're going to try to mitigate the pain as best we can. That's what we're going to do.
Does anyone have any more questions on reval or valuation? All right, then I think to save Mike from coming back another night, we're going to jump into the assessing budget.
So when we look at the assessing budget, before we get to the line items, I know you guys like the line items, but last year we came to you and had the idea of a shared assessor between multiple communities, and we hired a full-time admin assistant to be able to kind of keep the office going. We were going to bill out for, essentially we paid the entire assessor cost, and then we were going to bill out for that. The assessor that was bringing those municipalities to the table left, and that's why we went out and we were able to find Mike. I must have done a really good recruitment job because he's still here. But we have reorganized. I just want to talk to you a little bit about that reorganization. Mike is with us full-time, 40 hours a week. I, at this point, at least until we get over the reval and implementation of the reval, he works more than 40 hours. He could work even more than what he does. So we've got plenty of work for a full-time assessor. Mike is fairly independent, and so instead of having a full-time admin assistant, we had identified last year the need for the fire department to have an admin assistant, but we didn't have any money in the budget. So, yeah, so let me see. So we have a call it structure fire, but doesn't mean that it is. Doesn't mean that it is. It just means that's how it came across. Which is why you would see all of the things on it. So when Mike came on board, had conversation with him, and when we went out to hire the admin assistant, we actually turned it into a 20-hour admin assistant in community development and 20 in fire. So with no change to the budget, we were able to meet both of those needs. In doing that, we also identified that there are times of the year when Mike could use an extra set of hands for many, many hours, but other times when he really doesn't need an extra set of hands. So we moved that person into community development, and community development is taking, when Mike has needs, he works with the admin assistant to get the needs met. And I think that's working very, very well. The other thing is assessing used to report down in community development. We have changed that. Mike is very independent. He is a highly skilled professional employee, and he does not need another direct oversight. I'm very comfortable with him reporting directly to the manager's office, which is what he does. So although I'm not changing the structure of the budget, just be aware that assessing is not part of the community development structure. It is part of the budget, but not the structure. So that said, that is where those are the changes in the department. Do people have questions about the budget? Anybody have any questions?
So my one note was to explain the $10,000 for the professional technical support. But I think that's the reval. So I think I understand that a little bit more.
So this budget is down $16,379. Portion of that, where you see the decrease in the full-time salary, that is an indication of the part-time person not being charged, the admin support person not being charged out as many hours to this department.
But we'll see the
Increase.
increase on the
You'll see
fire
the
side.
increase on the fire side. Well, actually, you'll see it in the public safety side. We deem that because the other admin assistant, who is primarily focused on the police department, is in public safety. So we put the other admin assistant there.
Public safety.
Although she is entirely focused to provide support to the fire department.
Looks like training went down. Is there need? Oh, we went down $50, so I guess you don't really need to explain that. Well, sorry we can't grill you, Mike.
It's okay.
Pretty straightforward.
So I don't think we have anything.
Okay, you're free to go.
I'm all set.
As he runs.
As he runs out the door.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Mike.
Yes.
All right, Sophie, where would you like to go next? Back to the beginning?
I think we should go to the beginning
Okay.
and to, on page 17, if you're in, I'm assuming you've read all the narrative stuff, and we don't need to review that. I'm happy to take any questions. I'm really here for you guys, but The budgets for general government start on page 17.
Give everybody a minute to get there. It's 6:50.
Okay.
The problem is I like to go back and forth between the comparative pages and the.
That's why it's all,
Pages, rotating.
so the first budget that we would look at tonight is actually your budget. And I want to preface it by saying I know it's your budget. I put numbers in here. You're welcome to change them as you see fit. Salaries are actually determined by the charter, so I have no control over that. FICA Medi is determined by salaries. Council, travel, and training. We had a very, very small budget. We brought it up to $750. We have overspent that this year by $300. So as a point of discussion, I put $1,000 in. Nobody has given me a list of desired training, so I don't know how council wants to talk about that. But that was a place that I've just thrown a placeholder in for you guys to talk about. Membership dues are up significantly, and that is because we neglected to budget last year for MMA dues. So they got put in my budget. That's your membership. I would have increased my budget for professional services and membership dues significantly this year. Instead, I backed that off and added the $5,000 to your line.
So it's not an increase in the fee, it's an increase in where it was.
Yes. I took out all of the money for your tablet data because the feedback I keep getting from folks is that we have Wi-Fi here, you have Wi-Fi at your homes or wherever you're using your tablets, and you don't need data. So the plan would be to turn off all of the data and save $360. Yes? I like it when I actually pay attention. The audit, we're in the second year of a 5-year audit engagement, and this is the 2% is part of the contract. So we share that with WPCF, so we pay 80%, WPCF pays 20% of the audit. And employee recognition hasn't changed, but that is where we pay for the annual employee recognition luncheon when employees are seriously injured or very, very ill. Council likes to send flowers and recognition, small recognition gifts when people retire. So that's where that comes from. So overall, as presented, you're up about $5,300.
So I guess I would like to ask council about the travel and training. Did you think it was important last year, and should we increase it? Get a value out of it?
I went to the first training, the MMA training, and then I went to another training in Augusta in March, I think. But I don't see a whole lot coming up that interests me or that is appropriate, or I don't know if appropriate's the word, but relevant is probably a better word. So I'm not really sure what's on the agenda for next year for council, because I don't feel like we need to do the Freedom of Information Act training again and all of that stuff once you've done it once, or do we have to do that every year?
We could do it in-house.
Or we do it in-house, yeah.
We do it in-house. You are required to recertify every time you're elected.
I just haven't seen, I keep my eye out for those things because I do appreciate workshops and I do take advantage of them if I feel like they're relevant or something that I want to be knowledgeable about. I just haven't seen anything recently.
I attended the Build Maine conference last year, and I would like to attend it again. And that's in Lewiston. It's a 2-day conference, but I just go down and for the day, one day, drive back. And I learned a lot. I can't say that I brought something back that I don't recall bringing something back that I learned that we implemented. I also now 2 years in a row have attended the Victory Institute, forget what they call it, symposium, conference, whatever, in Washington, D.C., and I cover the cost of my travel, and I get a place to stay there because I have family there. So I connect it with one of the times I would visit my family, and I have learned a lot from that. Just expands my vocabulary on what other municipalities are doing. There's all different elected officials, and they have a section that I went to it this year, but not the previous year, that's international. So they have elected officials from all over the world talking about issues in their countries. So I find that very, it's been very helpful for me to understand what a role that a municipality can play in addressing issues that are important, in regionally or in the state and nationally and then internationally. So that unfortunately, because we didn't have this discussion last year, I didn't say, oh gee, I went to that once, I'd like to do that again. And so that's what put us over. And I appreciated that the finance committee voted that they would support that. I would like to go to that again. I think the Build Maine is about $83, and I think that the other conference was probably about the $300.
I don't think the numbers we're looking at are huge here. One thing, and this is not in regard to Lori at all, but I just think it's really important to remember when we go to these conferences, if the town is going to pay for it, that it's going to benefit somehow Orono, be it directly or indirectly. I mean, it's like greater understanding the power of municipalities and that sort of thing. But just for cool things that are going on out there, I hope we're making sure that they're the taxpayers' dollars, and I want to see them benefit from them. I do have questions when we move on about the membership thing, but we're not there yet. So hit it, Meg.
Oh, okay. That's quite an introduction. Okay. I feel as though clearly we do need to add some money to that budget because we went over. I think that's a smart thing to do. And because we are saving some money by getting rid of the data plan for our tablets to offset that, I think that's reasonable for this year. I don't think that we're ready to make a long-term assessment of that budget because there are two things that I would like to see going forward with this particular item. One of which is that I'd like us to develop a more organized method of scheduling these conferences, perhaps something similar to what we do for the work plan, where we could all kind of look into the things that we would think would be interesting and useful, a good use of taxpayer dollars, as Sam pointed out, something that would benefit this community, and that we could perhaps, I know that not everything's announced a full year in advance, but if there was some method, maybe quarterly or biannually, where we could kind of say, I would like to go to this conference or that conference, and we could weigh and balance, how many people are going to what conferences and how are we spreading that array. So that's one thing I think would help us better assess this budget line, item line. And then the other thing is, I feel like we really need a more organized method of making use of these conferences we attend. I know I've heard anecdotally about many people going to different conferences, but I don't feel as though I've absorbed any information in a meaningful way that would help me as a counselor. And I think that part of what this budget is great for is that not all 7 of us have to go to a conference. One of us goes and we pay for one of us, or maybe 2 of us, and then they bring back the knowledge to council. So if we could perhaps consider a more formal process of coming back and maybe making a presentation to council about, while things are fresh in your mind, to council and to the public about what you gleaned at the conference and how it could be applicable to this municipality. So once we have a more formally organized method of making use of this training budget, I think we'd be in a better position to actually assess what kind of money needs to be allocated.
So that was kind of like where I was going to go. So Sophie, for me, I kind of really would, I think that if we kind of go forward with it, is to really understand what actually is something that would be qualified within that parameter of these kinds of classes. Because that was the first thing I thought is that if I go to a class, I would expect that I would come back, do a presentation at whether it be some committee or something to show, and that we all can, and I'm glad that Meg brought that up to kind of like we can all gain some knowledge from this. But I think that one of the things, and I'm not sure if it's just kind of the way it's set up, is what exactly is something that is meant for Orono as a town that will benefit our town, not just simply something that I want to go do, and I'm going to do it through the process of the town's funding. Is there any kind of method that's set up that says this is?
So the method that's set up is exactly the opposite of what you described. So for my staff, when they want to go to a training, it has to have a direct benefit for Orono. And especially if that training is a significant piece of their training budget. The police chief, fire chief, they've got to show me where you're either working on a certification that the town requires or there's a direct benefit to the community. When I want to go to a training, I pick up the phone and call Cindy and say, other than the $50, I'm going to go down for the annual labor law update, the things that I have to do. But the bigger trainings, I pick up the phone and I call Cindy and say, here's the training. This is what I think the benefit is. This is why I think it's important that I go to Texas for the training. And then she talks to all of you to make sure nobody's got a major problem with it. And away I go. And then I come back and I tell you, I'm certified. Yay. For council, it gets a little squishy because although I'm charged with managing the budget, I do not manage you. You are my bosses. And so the way it had always worked in the past before we got a more energetic board, we had enough money budgeted for a few people to go to the MMA annual conference, and that was pretty much it. People weren't interested in doing things, or they'd do things on their own, bring it back, and it wouldn't go through the town. So I personally don't think it's fair to take people who are volunteers, say, go get educated about something and we're not going to pay for it. I do think that it's legitimate for the town to do it. I personally am not comfortable being the gatekeeper of these funds. I don't supervise you. And I think it would make perfect sense to establish a policy that talks about how decisions around training and those extra compensated things are
I mean, I
how those
think
decisions are made.
we can add it to the work plan, but I think last year the finance committee meeting met and we discussed a potential attendance at a seminar, and I thought that was a great. We talked about everything, and so I think that might be the method that we use, especially if we get conflicting people, not conflicting people, but wanting to go to different seminars and we start to run out of money. But at this point, I think it makes sense to especially with the loss of data, taking that out to increase the budget and use maybe finance committee or general workshops to discuss any upcoming seminars. And I do like the idea that Megan was saying of using, if we know something's coming up, if we could plan for that a little bit ahead of time, probably be good.
So when I went to a civic engagement, an MMA conference, and I never really got a chance to talk about, what I learned or bring it back to council because I think we just ran out of time. Most of the time, it's just the agenda set, and it's a little difficult. But I like the idea of having something formalized. If go away, come back in like within the next couple of weeks, whenever we have I'd like to do it in front of a workshop, a council workshop, and just here's a couple minutes. Tell us what you learned.
Or at least a summary of some sort, even emailed would be great.
Not a
something
problem, yeah.
I mean,
Right.
so we all can benefit a little bit more.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah, that's good too.
I have an idea. So there are elements of council workshop that are standing issues. Any correspondence, any, are there things that need to go to council, regular council meeting? We're kind of creating this template. Why don't we just put training, and it can be reports from previous training and upcoming training requests, have it all go through workshop. When people come to my office and say, I'd like to do this, can I? I mean, you're my bosses. My answer is, sure you can. I don't know what your colleagues are going to think, but this would formalize it. I also have a note to add this for a suggestion when Cindy and I provide the first cut of the work plan. We usually give the list of the items that we know are out there. I've made a note to add this to it. Does that work?
Being able to plan some of these things, whether it's the potential attendance at conferences or the presentation afterwards, having more kind of like lead time on that would be beneficial for those of us who have very crazy and hectic work schedules that sometimes pile on top of each other just because of how
And
things
who
work
doesn't
out.
have those kinds of
Right.
crazy work
But
schedules?
so, I wouldn't want anyone to have the experience of sitting here going, if it's just first come, first serve, and it's just happening on the fly, then there can be like the experience of going, geez, all the conference money's going away and I don't have time to do anything right now. So I guess I don't go to a conference this year or something along those lines. Or if Cheryl was her example of, suddenly we don't have time to present because it's this time of year. If we are kind of planning this a little bit more ahead, then we can kind of schedule out that time.
And would it be possible to just say you have your counselor, you have $100 to do an event, and that's it. And so you have it, and if you have it, you spend it, and if you don't, you don't. I
So
don't know how that.
when counselors ask me if it's possible, I kind of chuckle because anything is possible. You guys make the decision. So with do I think that that's maybe an approach that might make a little bit of sense if that's what folks want? I mean, also think about that training also covers not just conferences out, but training that we might bring in. So for example, if Cindy got really busy and was asking more people to facilitate meetings, we might want to bring in a how to run an effective meeting training for everybody. Or so in the past, we've used it for legal training to bring in to help you. So just understand that's not just out, it's also in. And so based on what I'm hearing either leave it the same or add more.
No.
I'm not what's published, either leave it at 1,000 or add more. I'm not sure.
Leave it at 1,000 because we've basically taken 360 out of the data
Okay.
line. And I think Sam had a question on the dues.
I might have missed it, but that's a huge jump in the membership. The large jump in the membership dues.
So
Thank you for repeating this. I appreciate
it's
it.
okay. It's all right. We have always held, not always, we have held for a very, very long time membership in Maine Municipal Association and also the Maine Service Center Coalition. That totals for us a little over $7,000 a year. Between WPCF and the town, you split the MMA membership costs, because remember, WPCF runs on a different funding mechanism. And then you pick up the $1,000 Main Service Center Coalition bill. So last year, we did not put the budget for MMA in the council budget. It got taken out of my budget. We can talk about memberships when we get to my budget, but I would have either asked for a significant increase in my budget or this. So what you'll see is not as much of an increase in my budget, and I moved this back to represent a whole town membership.
Sophie, could you explain what the Service Coalition is and why that's?
Yeah. So I actually serve on the board. I am your representative on the Main Service Center Coalition Board of Directors. There was, Maine Municipal Association is a huge advocacy arm for municipalities across the state. Many, many years ago, 15 or 20 at this point, there was a split of service center communities, larger cities. A service center is a community that is providing services to many more people than live in their community. Orono, by virtue of the University of Maine, is a significant service center community. But there was a split in MMA. There was a thought of many of the cities deciding that they wanted to peel off from Maine Municipal Association because they felt like MMA had 491 communities that it represented, most of them under 1,000, 2,500 people, and not very many service centers. So it felt like when you go to the Legislative Policy Committee or places where decisions were made based on every representative had one vote, and Bangor's vote was equal to Lakeview Plantation's vote, that the positions that MMA were taking were heavily skewed to small communities as opposed to the larger communities. So what happens with the Maine Service Center Coalition is Maine Municipal Association has taken a kind of more middle-of-the-road approach to local option sales tax or to public transit issues. We are out advocating for that. Maine Service Center Coalition is working hand in hand with the Maine Mayors, Municipal Mayors Coalition. So it's really looking at more of the urban issues. It's hard sometimes to think of Orono as urban, but we do have urban issues that small communities just don't have. So it allows us two places to be vocal and to get our point across. So one of the biggest issues facing Orono is our tax exempt property. That is an issue that the Maine Service Center Coalition is tackling. They don't know exactly how to do it, but they're trying, they're putting energy there. So I do think for $1,000 a year to be able to have a voice at the table at the coalition is important. Because while we have similar issues to Bangor, Lewiston, Augusta, Portland, South Portland, Damariscotta is also there. We have some unique challenges here in Orono that when we talk about how we use tax increment financing districts, that tweak in the law that we had talked about earlier this year, that came from Maine Service Center Coalition. That was not a Maine Municipal Association. They work hand in hand, and oftentimes it's the same people at the table in both meetings, but I think it allows us a wider, larger voice down in Augusta. Which, take any voice in Augusta these days. Is that helpful?
Anybody else have anything on council budget? Right, Sophie, we're at about 7:15. You want to tackle finance, or you want to go somewhere else?
Let's go to finance.
Okay.
So as you recall, last year we broke, it used to be all of the town office functions were kind of thrown together from downstairs. It was finance and administration. Now we have the town clerk's office and the finance department, which is working very well structurally, and we've got good checks and balances in place, and I'm very pleased with it. But we took a fairly large budget and created two much smaller budgets. You'll see a 2% increase in full-time salary. In finance, we have a finance manager who is has a very strong accounting background. Finance clerk, full-time finance clerk, and a part-time finance clerk who handles all the reconciliation. We really need the third body to be able to handle the segregation of duties to ensure that we don't have the check and the balance living at the same seat. That is what we kind of work on. So no major increases. We have a new employee, so there's a small step there for the employee, but this budget is based on a 1.7% cost of living increase, which comes directly from CPI, New England, all cities, so it is CPI. Health insurance is based on last year having an employee that was on his parents' health insurance, so we paid a buyout, and he got married, and so we now have a family plan. So that increase is entirely about a change in circumstance, not adding somebody now getting coverage that wasn't previously eligible for coverage or anything like that. The travel and training lines are both up in this department. Our finance manager, Connie Thorne, is doing a great job with ensuring that her people are staying current on cash management, IRS regulations, the things that we quite frankly want our finance staff to stay current in. Membership dues, we are now, Connie is now a member of Governmental Finance Officers Association, and actually she and I are working towards certification as governmental finance officers, so we have to belong. This is her membership. You'll see a corresponding increase on my membership, unfortunately more because I'm the treasurer. And software licensing, that's Trio. I don't have anything bad to report about Trio this year, which is good news. Yep. But it's 5% is what their increase is this year. And office supplies, when we broke out the the finance office from the town clerk's office, we put a guesstimate on office supplies. It had been a jointly managed supply line. So we under budgeted a bit. Part of what we find too is that in hyper-organization, which I appreciate about Connie, we use paper and notebooks and clips and just all the things. And we also go through some, adding machines. We've had to replace a few adding machines. So that is just an estimate there. So that is 7% increase, or $13,118. Most all of that in the health insurance. change.
Any questions? I had a question, Sophie. So generally, did you figure a 2% increase in wages?
1.7%
1.7?
cost of living. Then you will see in some of our admin support lines, our labor lines, the lower side of the pay scale, we had to bring that up. And so you'll see that in the documentation in places.
Generally,
1.7.
right now it's 1.7. The payroll processing, are we happy with that?
Am I ever happy? Me with technology, really. I would say yes. So I actually use ADP a lot more than I used when we were with Bangor Payroll. It's more intuitive. Our employees are, I think, enjoying the fact that they have instant access to their accrual balances. They can request time off from their cell phones and computer stations. We're not seeing mistakes on payroll the way we saw them before. When somebody's writing a number, is that an 8? Is it a 5? We've been able to standardize what types of a benefit, how we're using benefit time. So we now have, for example, somebody's injured, we have sick leave, workers' comp, which they just get paid straight wages, but we've got a record of it. Our records are much better. Our reporting is much better. We have not fully implemented the HR component. We're still continuing to work towards that. Even where we are, it is worth the additional, because we had a cost that we had about $12,000 a year just for the payroll processing. No, when we moved to ADP, there was a base cost to just process payroll. We put in the numbers and the people get money in their bank accounts, hopefully the right amount, every week. That was about $12,000. We then came back to council and said, I either need another body to administer HR, or let's try this technology piece. And for an additional per employee cost, we were able to implement digital timesheets and HR evaluation tools that we are beta testing in various departments right now. So that additional level of support, even though it's not fully implemented, I would say is worth the money. That we went from being so inundated with something as simple as open enrollment, which by federal law we have to hold, and there's a lot of information that has to go out through the door. We were actually having to send the packets out to the printer to be printed and come back in to be able, and then meeting individually with, in groups, but small groups with all the employees holding multiple meetings. Now we upload it all into ADP, and everybody in their individual accounts can review what their elections are, see what choices they have and how that will impact their deductions, and make their elections without ever having to come in and talk to me or Belle. And we were doing a lot of that. And, oh gee, I think I want to change my withholding. Now somebody can simply do it on the system themselves. And we're all backed up. Because they have to have a password to get in, that is as good as having their signature. So it's, I think, worthwhile.
I think ADP is great. Just out of curiosity and for transparency, out of that 30,000, about how much of that is ADP in the payroll?
All of it.
Okay. So, including payroll, gotcha, it's all ADP.
Yep.
Have we reduced staff time to, I know for a while there we had manual review of timesheets. Have we reduced that?
So what happens, the employee puts in their time, their department head. The department head is approving the time with a check of the box, so they have to go through and do that. Then that now goes down to finance. Zach runs payroll. Unless there's something that looks off, he's going through a final review of it. It's not, you remember seeing the stack of paper timesheets like this, and we were always chasing something. And when somebody didn't get paid, we had to do manual checks, and we aren't seeing that anymore. I do too. I think it's great.
Last year was the first year that you did this?
I think we've had it for 2 years.
So, and you were saying that before that it was $12,000 just for the payroll plus there's administrative time.
Yes.
So now there's so much less administrative time.
So when it was $12,000, I came back to council and said, we can try this for $18,000, or we can you can
Hire more people.
hire some, because that's what Belle and I were doing payroll. You do?
I do.
Yeah.
That long ago then. Yeah, good. This is different. This is not the payroll. I just have a question. There's 2 lines. There's equipment rental, and it's only $1,000. But there's equipment rental, and then there's small equipment purchase. But why are there 2 lines? Because there's
So there are 2 lines because the department head or the finance manager requested $500 in equipment rental and $500 in small equipment purchase. And I said, let's put it all in one place.
okay.
And the line just didn't get deleted.
Oh, okay. So the small equipment purchase is just not necessary, basically.
You
Okay.
probably will see in the trio budget something that's just going to say something like small equipment and rental purchase will be covered.
And the postage machine is used by everyone, and that sends out taxes and sewers.
Yes.
I have a more conceptual question, not a sort of line item question. And maybe this is something that we'll be talking more about when Shelley's here. But in the narrative for the finance department, there is a mention of an area of concern that, essentially it sounds as though with all of the bodies that work on the main floor of town hall, we just have such a high volume or an increasing volume in traffic at the front desk that work is being shifted around, and that is impacting, right? So some work that was being done by front desk staff is now kind of being done by finance staff, and that it sounded, the narrative description seemed like it had an ellipsis at the end of it. Like, this is okay for now, but obviously this is not a tenable situation. So maybe we'll get more into this when Shelley's here, but.
I think a couple of things. Part of that was to describe why we have pulled Shelley off the counter. Shelley is no longer, if you walk into town office, Shelley does not have a desk at the counter anymore. And the reason for that was to allow her to try to get some of the back office work done. We are working to shift things that are more finance related, like the reconciliation of taxes, water, and sewer, like lien process. Out front really isn't a prime place to be researching at the registry of deeds while people are walking in. That, I think, is meant more to talk about why we have 2.5 people in finance. I personally think we are adequately staffed right now, as long as council is okay with the wait times for people coming in. I know we don't rival DMV yet, but if we're okay with people waiting up to sometimes 15 or 20 minutes at peak times, if people are ahead of them with complicated transactions, I think we can make this work. I don't see it as imploding. But I do know that I need, even though I'm the treasurer and the tax collector, I need to get more of the day-to-day work off my desk. And that's what we're trying to accomplish. Is that?
Anything else? Okay. We got 15 minutes. Can you do IT in 15 minutes?
So I'm not going to do IT. We're going to skip IT because that's bells.
Okay. Want to do town manager then?
Sure. So the town manager's budget is up $20,081.75. And there are two major drivers for this. As you may recall, we pay salaries related to economic development out of our TIF funds. We make an approximation of the amount of time that is spent either administering the TIF or doing economic development work. And so it's not based on, unless you want to change the work plan that everybody has, it's not based on we've always done it this way. It's always been a 50% split of the assistant town manager's time and a 25% split of the town manager's time. It is truly based on what are those bodies doing. So when I look at my time, and one of the things that we've done in the last year as part of the assistant town manager development, professional development, we have peeled off the town office, so the town office staff now actually, Shelley reports to Bell. That's general administration. That is not TIF eligible for reimbursement. So one of the things you will see here is that we are shifting salaries that had been paid by the TIF back onto the general fund, because I can't justify continuing to pay those percentages because the work has changed. Right? Now you will notice in different places in the budget, we've identified other people who are doing economic development work, that work can be charged to the TIF. It's making some sense? So although it says it's a 7% increase, this is a 1.7% increase for my staff. So that would be the assistant town manager and the administrative assistant, and a 0 for me.
So, Sophie, is there any ramifications from shifting people back and forth in the TIF?
The ramification is on the general fund. What I'm
But
demonstrating,
I mean, as far
like if
as,
DECD came in,
yeah,
what I would be demonstrating is that we evaluate what the work that people are actually doing and are only funding what we believe are eligible expenses. So I think if anything, it strengthens our use of TIF funds for payroll. Now, just because I believe that doesn't mean that the person from DECD would believe it, but I'd make a good argument. Travel and training. There are two major things driving travel and training. The first is as part of the assistant town manager's professional development, I have identified there is a expectation that she will get some specialized training, and that training is only offered out of the state of Maine. So I've added some money to the budget to be able to cover that. The other big piece of this is, as I indicated before, governmental finance officials certification. I'm working on that with Connie. There are books that have to be purchased and tests that we'll have to pay for. So that's what's here. But I think the outcome will be good.
Can you explain how these trainings will benefit the town?
Sure. So, we have an assistant town manager who fills in my stead, who does not have formalized labor training, and or leadership training, which I think are two very important elements in the person who is. I think she does a good job. Don't get me wrong. I think she does a great job, but she needs some professional development. And so what will come back, I think, is a more cohesive approach to HR and leadership out of the manager's office. So that's Bell. For me, the governmental finance officer certification. So I have a master's degree. I've done governmental accounting. I have had accounting classes. I understand fund accounting. I understand those elements. But the town is required to follow the Governmental Accounting Standards Board, which changes in their rulings and in their expectations. They change often. I have not been keeping up with the changes, and we need to. In order to be able to not have our financial statements created by an independent, essentially sending our books at the end of the year to a CPA to have them do it, and then get them back, and then give them to our auditor to audit. We couldn't. That would be another $20,000 or $30,000. So instead, I would like to do what many towns of our size do, which is get more active in maintaining enough awareness of GASB regulations, the changing regulations, to be able to speak more of the language and present the financial statements more completely so that the auditor will get them, simply be able to audit them and give them back. The requirements on that independent audit have really been increasing, and if we don't keep up with it, we're going to have to do something off to the side. So the way we left it was that Connie and I would work towards that certification and also continue to be active with the governmental finance officers. Have I answered your question? So I think that will benefit the town.
I actually do, Sophie. So I'm going to go back to the general government side of things. One of the things that kind of under your staffing that jumped out at me, it's good to know that at least you feel we're at a tier 3. However, by reading the staffing side of it and saying how the way you were staffed would be normally good and doable, however, you are taking on responsibilities from other departments. Why is that? And are they short-staffed or,
So we have department heads that are doers. They're on. I don't have department heads that sit behind desks and have staff that go do. All of my department heads have a doing function. In having a doing function, it means, for example, when Rob Yerxa wants to hire someone, that hits my desk because he doesn't have the time to do that. And I think when we look at those tiers in main government, where if you have a manager, it really runs the gamut. In the town I was in before, I was the road commissioner and the cemetery superintendent and that kind of stuff. Here, my job is to provide the support for my department heads and utilize them for their technical knowledge, but the management support, I provide quite a bit of that. I don't think that that's necessarily bad. It just means that when council wants something, it kind of falls at the mercy of what are the operating needs. I'm more pulled into the day-to-day operation than other managers that would, their prime job would be to manage council and then support day-to-day. Am I making sense, Terry?
Was it more or less like that individual who's in charge is taking on responsibilities, or she having to hold that, or working with them?
So if, I'm going to pick on Rob Yerxa just because he's easy, and he's one that you see more. If Rob had an administrative assistant and a deputy director, and he could be really looking at planning and managing, supervision. So I have some department heads that I just see discipline after it's cut, before it's finalized, just to review it to make sure that it's consistent and legal. I have other people, Rob Yerxa is perfectly capable of doing that. He does not have any time. So he comes, calls me, tells me what the issue is, and I do that in his name for him to review an issue. So when I look at, there was a time that I would have said, no, Rob is way understaffed. Council has done a good job of getting him support he needs and allowing us to create more of a leadership structure in the department. I think this is doable, and in a community of this size, I don't think it's unreasonable to have a manager who is focused on operations. In putting that in the matrix, I put that there simply to say, if council is looking for more support, more supporting its big projects, there isn't enough of me to be able to do that. So we'd have to decide how we were going to resource that. Am I making sense? Yeah, there's only so much of me.
Yeah, I know that.
So, Sophie, it's 7:42.
Okay.
7:43. So, we'll maybe finish up town manager next time and move into the remaining. Is there anything that council wants to see for the next meeting that they don't have? I think I told you the actuals.
So there was a goof when we printed the books. The intent, if you notice in your budget, it has what the budget was the last year, what the request is this year, what the difference is, what the percent is, and then comments. We had a line in there called year-to-date expended, but when we went to print it, it made the print so small that you would have needed a magnifying glass. So what we had decided to do was print out year-to-date actual budget reports so that you would then be able, if you wanted to know how much had been spent, there would be the budget report for the department. I will get those for you for next time. I will run them through the end of April so that you'll be able to see them. But I do apologize for that. There was a method to the madness.
Also, FYI, I won't be here next week on the 20th.
Okay.
Not next week, but our next meeting. Sorry.
I do have something that I'd like to, when we finish up the town manager budget, and I'm aware of the irony of this request, but I would like to talk a little bit more about, not just in general terms, but perhaps in more specific terms about how, sort of picking up on what you were just saying to Terry and some of the things that are in the narrative here about how your time is allocated and how some of the changes in council's sort of requests or demands on your office have shifted around or added to workloads or are making workloads challenging, so that we can all better understand our role in how your budget balances, if that makes sense. So I'm asking you to do some work to tell about how council makes you do work. So that is, yeah.
I think that's great. I've got two quick things. One, really quick. Number one, just to let you know, we have a compromise we are going to bring to council around 19 Mill Street. I've met with the property owner. We have something that I think council can at least discuss and make some decisions about. So that is coming before you on Monday night. I usually don't just throw things on a council agenda. I'm throwing this on the council agenda. Huh? Oh, I know. I suggested that that probably would be really important. The second thing, you will see an ad in the paper for requests for proposals for North Main Avenue. We had gone to Finance and Operations Committee, letting them know that our $300,000 budgeted project, when the engineering was done and they dug into it, they found significant drainage issues that created a project with an estimated budget of $900,000. The committee asked us to look at phasing. We have done that. We're putting this out to see what the prices are, but what your budget reflects is what we think it will cost to get the first half of the project done, and think it's a reasonable stopping point to then start looking at the second half. So I don't normally come and say, how do you want me to do something, and then just have something show up in the paper, but we thought it was important to get. What time is it, Cindy?
7:47.
Ha ha ha. Thank you. Let me just go turn off the